Okay, we're on chapter 6. I believe we're up to part 7 or video 7. We may be on 6. If I've got my numbering wrong, don't worry about it, because we left off in the last one with this chart about the various intentional torts. And now we're moving on to talk about property. So we're going to have a chapter on property, but we're talking now about the relationship between torts and property when there's a tort or wrongful act against property. So the law divides property into two types: real property and personal property. Real property is defined as land and anything that is permanently attached to the land. It includes generally the minerals below the land, like oil or gold, and it includes the things that are on top of the land, like trees. Crops can be real property, but most often they're personal property. It also includes the space above the home or the structure, but allows for interference with that by aircraft and other things that need to be in the sky, especially if they're way up high. Okay, so that's not an exact kind of thing, but you do have a certain amount of property right above your land. Okay, now personal property is further divided into tangible and intangible property. So tangible personal property is anything you can touch, like a car, a television, a sofa. That's personal property. Your clothing, another example. Intangible personal property is something that you can't really touch. You may be able to touch something that's symbolic of it, but it's not the actual thing. It just represents something. So stock, if you have a stock certificate, ownership in a corporation, that would be intangible personal property. Okay, so we have trespass to land, which occurs when a person goes on somebody else's land without permission. It doesn't require that you do any physical harm to the land. Of course, if you don't do any physical harm, the damages are going to be significantly less. It also can be a situation where you went onto the land authorized by the owner to do so, but you remained on the land after the owner asked you to leave. So you're no longer authorized to be there. That becomes a trespass. Generally, a trespasser is liable for the damages they cause to the property, and also cannot sue the landlord for any injuries that they suffer as a result of any accidents that they have on the land. And that varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. In some instances, the property owner may have a duty even to trespassers to warn them of a dangerous situation, such as perhaps if there is a open well that somebody could fall into and seriously get injured or die. You might have to put up a sign or put some ropes around it in most jurisdictions. Also, another exception is what's called the attractive nuisance doctrine. And the attractive nuisance doctrine applies to children, and that's a situation where you have something on your land that would attract children, particularly if they're not being supervised by their parents, and the child goes on the property to investigate that attraction and is injured by it. So if you have a swing set in your front yard and a child comes onto your property and gets on the swing set and gets on the swing, and the swing is rusted and the child falls out of it, you may be liable even though that child is a trespasser. Now, in that situation, there may be some responsibility on the part of the parent who failed to supervise as well, and you may get into what we call a comparative negligence situation, but we'll talk about that later. Okay. Some trespasses are necessary. So, for example, if you're walking on the sidewalk down the street and a car jumps off the road and onto the sidewalk, and to avoid getting hit, you jump onto somebody's land, that's not going to be a trespass. That's a necessity. The other situation is where you come onto the person's property by invitation. either as a guest for a personal reason, social reason, or as a business reason, like a utility service person. Okay, so in those situations we say that the person has what's called a license, which is a right to come on the property for a certain purpose. Okay, now trespass to personal property is basically when somebody interferes with your personal property. Okay, so conversion is where the other person deprives you of your personal property. So if somebody takes your bicycle without your permission, that's conversion. In the criminal area, we call it theft, of course. And that gives rise to a civil action for damages. Or if you lend somebody your bicycle and they don't return it when they were supposed to, then that creates failure to return property, which is a type of conversion. Disparagement of property occurs when economically injurious falsehoods are made about another person's product or property rather than about the person's reputation. Okay, so if somebody comes into your restaurant and screams and yells to everybody that your hamburgers are made with horse meat, that's disparagement of a product or property. Okay, slander of quality versus slander of title. One has to do with the quality of the product, the other has to do with ownership. They're both can give rise to liability. Okay, so there's a chart about intentional torts against property, and we're going to pick up next with unintentional torts in what would be part 8, I believe.